Mike Sullivan is the new head coach of the New York Rangers. We talk about why Ranger fans should be excited and why he was very likely the best option available.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blueshirts fans, to episode number 1303 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Rangers move quickly this offseason. They get their guy. Mike Sullivan is indeed the new head coach of the New York Rangers. And per Emily Kaplan, or at least this is where I first saw it on social media as news broke that the deal was officially official and the job was done and Mike Sullivan was going to be the new coach. This is where I saw it first. Like I said, Sullivan's deal is for 5 years, and it will make him the highest paid NHL head coach in history. It has the highest average annual value of any NHL head coach that we've ever seen. And my first thought when I saw this, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to make this joke, but it was, okay, thank God that the coach's salary does not count against the salary cap. The Rangers have enough issues there as it is. Frankly, I don't really care how much Mike Sullivan is making because it really doesn't affect anything. It really just comes down to how much money that James Dolan is going to fork over to Sullivan to be the new head coach of the New York Rangers. So it's all well and good. The Rangers got their guy. And, there's some mixed feelings about, is Sullivan the right coach for the Rangers at this point in time? And obviously fans are going to debate this and whether there was somebody else they would have liked more. And maybe in some cases, there's certain fans that would have liked to see the Rangers, go out and make somebody a first-time NHL head coach, try to get their own John Cooper, try to get their own Jared Bednar. And I can certainly understand that. But I will say this, overall, I do like the hiring here. And just because Mike Sullivan is the safest option, just because he was always the most likely option once him and the Penguins parted ways, and just because he was the front runner, it doesn't mean that he's a bad choice. It's not the boldest thing the New York Rangers have ever done. You could always kind of connect the dots from the second that Mike Sullivan became unemployed a handful of days ago. But that doesn't make it a bad choice. I think it's a very good choice. Now, granted, I did say something very similar 2 years ago. We were in this exact same situation, and the Rangers hired Peter Laviolette. Going into that coaching cycle, Laviolette, you knew he was going to get another job. You didn't know for sure who it would be with. It ends up being the Rangers. He was always sort of the front runner for the Ranger job, and ultimately they did go with Laviolette. And even the coaching cycle before that one, when the Rangers went with Gerard Gallant. So this is 3 straight times that the Rangers have gone with the safest and most predictable choice to be their next head coach. But like I said, there is a good amount to like here about this hiring for Mike Sullivan. It's very difficult, for me at least, to get upset about this team hiring a coach that has won 2 Stanley Cups and somebody that has posted a record with the Pittsburgh Penguins of 409 wins, 255 losses, and 89 overtime losses. And if we were to combine all the losses together, you're still looking at 409 wins against 344 losses. Also a postseason record of 44 wins and 38 losses. And, maybe part of the reason why this job appealed to Mike Sullivan is the very simple fact that he's kind of done with rebuilds. The Penguins were kind of in this weird gray area where they were sort of trying to reload and still go for it, with the big 3 there with, Crosby and Letang and Malkin, and try to still contend with those guys that have delivered them 3 cups. So they were sort of going for it, but then they were making moves where it kind of looked like they were rebuilding as well and sort of caught in between, which, that's neither here nor there because that's the Penguins. And obviously we're talking about the Rangers. But the bottom line, maybe Sullivan was looking to get out there. He's not looking to do the whole rebuild thing. He wants to join a team that is looking to go for it in the short term. And I think that does apply for the Rangers. Listen, I know this last season was a complete disaster, a complete embarrassment on just about every single level. But if you've watched the Rangers over the last, 9 months or so, however far you want to go back, really beginning with the trade of Jacob Trouba, or even the rumors that the Rangers would trade Jacob Trouba, it's pretty obvious at this point that the Rangers are not going full-on tear-down rebuild. they are going for a retooling of sorts. We saw that begin with, actually, I guess the first move would have been when they waived Barclay Goodrow, and then it continued with the trade of Jacob Trouba, the trade of Capo Caco, so on and so forth. But the reason I bring this up is I feel like the fact that the Rangers are looking to retool aggressively and contend as soon as this upcoming season, that very likely applied to Mike Sullivan. I don't know that for sure. I mean, there could be a bunch of reasons why this job was appealing for Mike Sullivan. But the bottom line, I get the feeling that he was looking for a team that was going to go for it right here and right now. And as I've said in the past on here, we can debate the Rangers strategy. There's people that want to see this team do a full-on tear down rebuild. And I can certainly understand that viewpoint. And, we've debated the Ranger approach, retooling versus rebuild. What should they do? But again, if you follow what this team has done over the past 9 months or so, it's pretty obvious this is the route that they're going on. They're going for the aggressive retooling on the fly. And that now has honestly kind of spilled into the coaching position as well. You move on from Peter Laviolette and you bring in Mike Sullivan. This is a guy that is capable, or at least his previous track record would indicate that he's capable of turning things around in a heck of a hurry. This is clearly the Rangers guy. And one of the biggest reasons why I like this Sullivan hiring is that the 2 Stanley Cups that he won with Pittsburgh were his first 2 seasons there. He took over the first year in the middle of the season. I believe he was the head coach of Pittsburgh's AHL team, and then Bilesma got fired, and they put Sullivan there. They win the Stanley Cup that year. They win the Stanley Cup the year after that. Now, obviously, that's no guarantee that the same thing is going to happen here with the Rangers. And the Rangers, as we've documented on here, and as you are all keenly aware, they do have some serious issues and some things that they're going to have to work out this offseason. A lot of big decisions still to be made. But I do think, given the track record and given the rapid turnaround that we saw Sullivan lead the Penguins on when he was hired by them, I think this is a good hiring, and I think it makes a lot of sense. There's some obvious talent on this Ranger team. They clearly did not make the most of it this past season, but the talent is there, and I'm hopeful that Sullivan is the guy that can get the most out of it, and if nothing else, just light a fire under this team. I mean, how many times last year did we say the Rangers were flat? The Rangers didn't come to play. The Rangers just didn't show up. The Rangers look like they're out to lunch, basically. I don't think that's going to happen as much under Mike Sullivan. There's no guarantees for sure, especially with this core group of players. But this is somebody that comes in with immediate credibility, immediate cachet, and should immediately command the respect of that New York Ranger locker room. And I obviously hope that that's the case. But something that I think you have to like about this, even if you're not completely sold on Mike Sullivan in and of itself, just how quickly this came together and how much it seemed like the Rangers wanted Mike Sullivan and how much it seemed like Mike Sullivan wanted to coach the New York Rangers. And, as far as like other options, were there any better options than Sullivan? I mean, you could make a case for David Carl. Obviously, he would be something of an unknown at the NHL level. But as I mentioned in just our most recent episode yesterday, I don't think that Carl was looking to be the next head coach of the Rangers. I could be wrong. I can't speak for him. Only he knows the answer to that question, himself. But given the situation that he's in, all the success that he's had with Denver, he can basically pick and choose what job he wants if he wants to go to the NHL at all. And I don't know that the Rangers are necessarily the most appealing place for a first-time NHL head coach right now, given how much turmoil and drama there was this past season. So I just didn't really picture it in my head, seeing Carl come to the Rangers. And I know some people threw out John Cooper as well. Cooper is still employed by the Lightning, at least as of right now. And obviously they got bumped out of the playoffs in 5 games by the Panthers. There's some rumors that he could be on the way, that he could get fired, or there could be a mutual parting between Cooper and the Lightning. But there's also rumors that if that were to happen, he'd be interested in the Utah position, given that him and the owner are very close with each other. And Utah's got, a young team with some exciting players and I think less drama than the Rangers had this past season. So I don't know that Carl and Cooper were ever really big-time options for this Ranger team. And, Sullivan, I think, was the best choice of pretty much everybody that was available. And I'll say this as well. We're very fortunate, us Ranger fans, that whether we're talking about players or coaches, that people still want to come here. There's been a lot of drama over the years. We know that, the Rangers have generally been competitive over the last, 20 seasons or so, however far back you want to go. And obviously they've made some pretty deep runs at it, but they never complete the journey. 1 Stanley Cup in 85 years. Despite all that, and despite there often being drama behind the scenes with the New York Rangers, we're still living in a world where players want to come play for the New York Rangers, and apparently coaches want to come coach for the New York Rangers. Gerard Gallant jumped at it. Peter Laviolette jumped at it. And now, as I was saying earlier, Mike Sullivan, with zero hesitancy, comes over to the New York Rangers and signs on to be their new head coach. To my knowledge, I don't know this for sure. I'll have to look this up later to know for sure. But I don't think Sullivan interviewed with anybody else after, him and the Penguins decided to part ways. And I don't think the Rangers interviewed any other coaches since Peter Laviolette was fired. So if nothing else, you've at least got that unity, that idea that, okay, Sullivan clearly wants to coach this team. The Rangers clearly want Sullivan to coach this team. So if nothing else, it's not a situation where the Rangers just hired Sullivan because he was there. And it's also not a situation where Sullivan just took the job because it was there. This is very mutual on both sides. Clearly, there was a ton of interest going both ways, and they got their guy. Seemed to happen very quickly. I mean, it definitely happened very quickly. Seemed to happen very painlessly as well. And obviously, Dolan, I mean, there's mixed feelings on him at best among Ranger fans, but if the rumors are to be believed that Sullivan is the highest paid coach in NHL history, I mean, he did pony up the dough to get his guy. So if you give him nothing else, you got to at least give him that. But in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. Going to talk about what are some of Sullivan's biggest challenges with this Ranger team. And there are many. I mean, like I said, there is some talent here, and there's some young talent here as well. But this team has some issues. And if you don't think so, then you probably didn't watch a whole lot of games this past season. So we'll talk about that, the biggest challenges that Sullivan is facing. And we'll also talk about who might round out his coaching staff. There were some rumors earlier today that John Tortorella might end up joining as an assistant coach. We'll talk about all of that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. You've got all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. Easy collaboration. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is also brought to you by Gametime, and the Stanley Cup playoffs are here. And if you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it is unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it's next level. And thanks to Gametime, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Gametime is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. They've got last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Their all-in pricing shows you the total cost up front with none of those annoying surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's go and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers, as always, for sticking with this podcast through all the ups and downs, the twists and turns, and certainly the offseason. We got a lot to cover. There's a lot going on in Rangerland right now. Obviously, Mike Sullivan, that's going to be the headline grabber. Going to do probably like a part 2 of Mike Sullivan, possibly in the next episode. We want to talk about some of the biggest winners and losers of this hiring of Mike Sullivan. We'll do some World Championship talk. There are a handful of Rangers that are going to compete in that. That begins 1 week from today. Juuso Parson, I believe the deal is done. He was said to be closing in on a 2-year extension with the Rangers. Joe Micheletti announced his retirement from the booth. Kind of feel bad for Joe. It's kind of getting lost in all this excitement with the new coach being hired, and he deserved a bigger send-off, but I think he wanted the spotlight to be on Sam Rosen. Regardless, we will talk about him. And I've already reached out to Hunter and Patrick of Locked On Pittsburgh Penguins hoping to do a crossover episode with those guys and just talk about Sullivan and some general hockey stuff as well. So, yeah, looking forward to all that good stuff in the days and weeks to come here. But for right now, let's keep the focus on Mike Sullivan and the fact that he is indeed the new head coach of the New York Rangers. So what are some of the biggest challenges that he's facing with this team? There's a lot, like I just said. And today we're going to focus more on sort of like the culture of the Rangers as opposed to some of the X's and O's. The X's and O's we'll get to in a future episode, probably in part 2 of this whole Sullivan deal that we've got going on right now. But for starters, I mean, just getting effort out of these guys, which sounds so simple and so obvious, but did you watch this Ranger team last season? That was just an absolute impossible task to get this Ranger team to play hard, at least with any sort of consistency. Yeah, there were nights where they brought it and they went out there and they actually, skated hard and back-checked every once in a while. That was good. But you guys know just as well as I did, they came out flat as a pancake, no fewer than I would say at least 15 times this past season. And that's got to stop. If it happens 2 or 3 times over the course of 82 games, okay, fine. You know what? They're not robots. I get it. These things happen every once in a while. That was their default setting last year, was coming out flat or at the very least not playing a full 60 minutes. So that was a big problem, obviously. And that's going to be, I think, one of the first things that Mike Sullivan's going to have to do with this Ranger team is just get them to bring it, just get them to show effort every single night. I mentioned a second ago that I'm looking to do the crossover episode with the guys from Locked On Penguins. And that's always fun. It's always good talking hockey with them. And, they do a great job with their show too. I'm actually going to check out their Mike Sullivan is leaving episode as soon as I'm done recording here, because I'm curious to see what they had to say about that. But one of the questions I'm definitely going to ask those guys if we do the crossover is whether the Penguins' recent problems are due to a lack of talent or a lack of effort. Now, I get the feeling that it could be a little bit of both, but I'm hoping at the very least that it more has to do with the fact that the team's just not very good, as opposed to, they're dogging it night in and night out. Because, if it's a lack of talent, that's a little bit more understandable as far as why the Penguins have fallen off so hard in recent years. If it's a lack of effort, though, that doesn't necessarily look all that great on Mike Sullivan. So I'm very curious to see what they have to say about that. But I've mentioned this before. As bad as the Rangers were this past season, you can't tell me there's not any talent on this roster. To me, with the Rangers this past year, it had more to do with a lack of work ethic than anything else. Just a lack of drive, fire, intensity, call it whatever you want to call it. But I'm hoping that Mike Sullivan can bring that out of the Rangers next season, because if they can just ramp up the intensity a little bit, I think they're at least a playoff team. I mean, you go from President's Trophy to missing the playoffs. To me, the truth probably lies somewhere in between those two extremes. So hopefully, Sullivan can get these guys to bring it next year. I think also a big challenge for Mike Sullivan, earning the trust of the players and also all of us fans. This one's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's somewhat true. We've always, as Ranger fans, thought as Mike Sullivan as the bad guy, the villain. This is the guy that's been coaching the team that I believe has been the Rangers' biggest rival for the past 10 years. And I know some people will fight me on that and they'll say, no, it's the Islanders. It'll never be anybody other than the Islanders. I get it. But when you look at the intensity and just all the playoff meetings that we've seen with the Penguins over the years, to me, the Penguins are the biggest rival. And we're used to seeing Sullivan, obviously preside over them. I was surprised by this. In the Sullivan era with Pittsburgh, the Rangers and Penguins have only met each other twice in the playoffs. I thought it was more than that. But thinking back, I think a couple of them happened right at the end of the Bilesma era with the Penguins, which is why it was fewer times than we might have thought. It was only twice. The Penguins beat the Rangers in 5 games in the first round en route to winning the Cup during the first year under Sullivan. And then the Rangers got their payback, 3 years ago at this point, coming back from 3 games to 1 down, knocking out the Penguins in overtime of Game 7. One of the most fun Ranger moments I can ever remember. But there have obviously been some battles. There's been some ugliness, some nastiness between these two teams over the years. And again, Mike Sullivan has been front and center for all of that. So like was the case with Peter Laviolette, I think it's going to take a little while for us to get used to this. We've got a couple of months to prepare, but that is going to look strange at first, right? Mike Sullivan behind the Ranger bench, instead of him being the coach of the team that we got to take down and the team that we got to get past to get where we want to go. Yeah, that's going to be different for sure. But the bottom line, if he wins, nobody's going to care. They'll welcome him with open arms at that point. They have to win and they have to do well. And if the Rangers struggle out of the gate next season, I'm sure Sullivan is going to be hearing it from Ranger fans. But if they do well, if they win a Stanley Cup somehow under Mike Sullivan's tenure here, then all will be forgiven very, very fast. I think that is for sure. I think we can certainly all agree on that. Something else that Mike Sullivan is going to have to do, and this might be the biggest thing, the most important thing on the checklist for Sullivan, he's got to get the most out of the young players on the New York Rangers. Absolutely huge. You know, whoever the Rangers ended up choosing as their next head coach, whether it was Sullivan or anybody else, I think this was going to be number one on the checklist. We don't need to go through all the names right now. I mean, we will in a little bit, I suppose. But the bottom line, the Rangers in recent years have not been able to get the most out of their young players, their homegrown prospects, guys that they've taken in the first round or the first couple of rounds. We just haven't seen enough from a lot of those players. And in some cases, I mean, we've seen first rounders that were just flat out busts and that, you know, fell out of the league just as quickly as they got here. Certainly guys like Elias Anderson and Vitaly Kravtsov would fit that description. But those two were obviously long gone. The guys that are the most important, I actually did write down a list here. The following players on the Rangers are all 24 years old or younger. And they've all got at least some upside. Now, how high their ceiling is, it varies from player to player, and it varies on your perception of all these players. But listen to all these names on the Rangers right now. They're 24 or younger, and there's a lot riding on the development of these players. But this is the list. You've got Lafreniere, you've got Cooley, you've got Perreault, Berard, Othman, Edstrom, Schneider, Zach Jones, if he's back next season, we'll see. That could go either way. Dare I even throw Matt Rempe in there? I mean, he is a young player, and he does play a very specific role for the Rangers. And sooner or later, you'll see guys like Sikora. You'll see guys like Fortescue. You'll see guys like Emery. A lot of young, important players on this Ranger team, and the Rangers have to get these guys to that next level. I feel like everybody that I just named there, at the very least, there's another level that they can get to, and Mike Sullivan has got to get them there. That is absolutely paramount for this team's success going forward. And I will say, the one thing that gave me some pause about Mike Sullivan is that when you look at his tenure as Penguins coach, and specifically the recent years, there aren't really a lot of like fast developing elite young prospects for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And at least some of that has to fall on the head coach. Now, I do think that part of the reason that there aren't players that fit that description is they just don't have a lot of like young, high upside talent, the Penguins, at least not at this moment. And again, that's a good question, I think, for Hunter and Patrick if we do the crossover for Locked On Penguins. But that is the one thing that gave me some concern about Sullivan, is it doesn't seem like there's a lot of like, you know, blossoming young stars on the Pittsburgh Penguins, at least as of right now. Something else that Sullivan is going to have to do, he's got to reset the culture. He's got to convey a message to this Ranger team. And this kind of goes hand in hand with what I was talking about earlier. But he's got to convey a message. Effort is no longer optional. And I feel like that will be the case under Sullivan. Like I said, he goes in there with a ton of credibility right off the bat. He tends to be a fiery, pretty intense coach, somebody with 2 Stanley Cups and a proven track record. And if you don't want to play for this guy and you're a member of the Ranger team, then who do you want to play for? Didn't want to play for Quinn. Didn't want to play for Gerard Gallant after the first year. Didn't want to play for Peter Laviolette after the first year. Do you want to play for Sullivan? Is there somebody else you'd rather play for? It's not even like a rhetorical question. I mentioned that in the past. Like I'm legitimately wondering at this point, what is the ideal coach for this core group of players that, you know, seems to have a good first year with the new head coach and then kind of phones it in after that. And hopefully that's not the case with Sullivan and the Rangers. Something else that I'll throw out there too that I feel like the Rangers and Sullivan could do. I don't think they're going to do this, but they could do this. And we'll talk about this in more detail in a future episode as well. You guys saw how bad it was with the Rangers this past season. And we're not just talking about the fact that they missed the playoffs. It's the fact that they didn't show up for so many games, and there seemed to be a pretty distinct lack of leadership on this team. So whether it was going to be Sullivan or anybody else, the idea that I threw out there not too long ago, and we'll talk about this in greater detail later, is take the alternate captaincy away from all 4 alternate captains. Kreider might be traded, and at that point, it's a moot point anyway. But you need leadership on this team, and you need to, if you're a new head coach, come in there, clean slate. Let me see how these guys interact with each other. Let me see who's really taking the bull by the horns here. Let me see who's going to essentially steer the ship. And if you feel like it's somebody other than the current alternate captains, then you adjust to that. You can name a new captain, whether that's Trocheck or Miller, a dark horse candidate, new alternate captains. You know, maybe one of the young guys is one of the alternate captains. I'm not against that idea in the slightest. So we'll see. I don't know that Sullivan would do something that drastic right out of the box, but would any Ranger fan really oppose that idea? I mean, do you feel like the 4 alternate captains from this past year absolutely must be the 4 alternate captains going into this next season? maybe there's some people that do feel that way, but I feel like the majority of Ranger fans are not married to that idea. That's how we'll put it. And one more thing that I'll throw out there, and like I said, we'll get into X's and O's and all that good stuff in a future episode. But as far as the culture goes, you got to figure out a way to sustain success here. Because as we just mentioned with Gallant, with Laviolette, awesome first seasons, two of the most fun seasons that I've ever had in my life as a fan of this team, both definitely top 5. And I've been watching this team now for more than 30 years. After that, it all seems to go downhill very quickly. And I hope something similar does not happen. I'll take the success in year 1, but it's got to go longer than that. You got to find a way to reach these players. And maybe we're at the point where, if Sullivan has success in year 1 and everything falls apart in year 2, then at that point, there can be no doubt left. This is on the players far, far, far more than it's on the coaches. I already feel that way, but that would confirm it beyond any shadow of any doubt. So Sullivan's got to figure out a way to get some longevity in there. And I'm hoping that this actually is a long-term thing. He did sign a 5-year contract. Doesn't mean he can't be fired before that expires, but the Rangers are thinking long-term. Hopefully Sullivan's thinking long-term. And hopefully the players, the ones that are going to be there for the long haul, they're thinking long-term and they say, okay, this is our coach and this is the guy that we're going to play for. So in just a second, going to keep everything rolling. I want to shift our attention to the rest of Mike Sullivan's coaching staff. As of right now, it's up in the air. We don't know who's going to round out the staff, but I'll have some thoughts on that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. You can find the right talent quickly. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. There's also fast and easy hiring. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day with multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers and wrap up today's episode by talking a little bit about Mike Sullivan's coaching staff, the one that he is yet to fill out, but obviously that'll be coming in the future days and weeks here. But I mean, where do we start? I'm thinking maybe we start with John Tortorella, because there was actually a report earlier today that he might be coming back. He was a strong candidate to rejoin the Rangers as an assistant coach. And then there was another report that said, no, it looks like that's actually not going to be happening. I think a lot of people, given the history between Sullivan and Tortorella, kind of figured there was a good chance that this would happen. There would be a reunion here. For anybody that might not know, Sullivan was Tortorella's assistant coach when Tortorella coached the Rangers back in the late 2000s and early 2010s there. And then they were also together for the 1 year in Vancouver. I'm not sure if they've had any other stops. The Four Nations, they were together there. Maybe one other international team, I'm not sure. But the bottom line, there's a ton of familiarity there, obviously. And obviously people connecting the dots and thinking maybe Tortorella could be an assistant coach. This is per Emily Kaplan. And again, I don't know who had this first, but this is where I saw it first on social media. So she tweeted out earlier today, John Tortorella did speak with the Rangers, but will not be rejoining after all. Believes Sullivan's contract is for 5 years and is the highest annual salary for a coach in NHL history. So, yeah, I mean, it does sound like there might have been some interest there. As far as why Tortorella chose not to take the position, it's possible he's holding out for a head coaching job. Now, would the Rangers and Sullivan, would they wait to see how it goes with Tortorella? And if he doesn't get a head coaching job, maybe they bring him in as an assistant. I mean, you don't really have to be in any super hurry to fill out the coaching staff if you're Mike Sullivan and the Rangers. You've got some time here. So you can, if you really want Tortorella, and that's the case, and Tortorella is looking for a head coaching job, you can wait and see how that goes. And if he doesn't become a head coach, then maybe he's more open to becoming an assistant coach. Something I mentioned, though, when we did our John Tortorella episode and talked about the idea of him coming back to be the head coach of the Rangers, First of all, I wanted no part of that. I'd be at least a little bit open to him returning as an assistant. Head coach, I wanted no part of that whatsoever. But the one point that I made there that I'll repeat here for anybody that might have missed it, I just can't see John Tortorella as an assistant coach at this stage in his career. And I know, again, he did it for the Four Nations, but that's like 4 games. He's very set in his ways. He's very stubborn, and he's somebody that seemingly wants to do things his way. And it's nothing against Sullivan, I don't think, for Tortorella. I just don't think he's wired to be an assistant coach. And I could be wrong. Maybe he ends up being assistant coach for the Rangers after all. Maybe he's an assistant somewhere else if he can't get a head coaching job. But I don't know, man. Just knowing everything we know about Torts, I just can't picture him in that role. So as of now, looks like it's not going to be happening. Tortorella will not be an assistant coach with the Rangers. But I guess never say never. We'll see how everything plays out over the coming days and weeks here. Another name, familiar name for Ranger fans, David Quinn. He was the assistant coach, or one of the assistant coaches for the Penguins with Sullivan this past year. Emily Kaplan reporting that Quinn is not expected to follow Sullivan to the Rangers, but he will be a candidate to be a head coach in the NHL, and that includes with the Penguins. So there's a possibility that he could even take over for the Penguins. Then you've got a couple of in-house candidates to be assistant coaches, and this goes back to something that we've talked about off and on. When the Rangers fired Peter Laviolette, they also fired Phil Housley. They did not fire Michael Pekka or Dan Muse. They gave them both the idea that they're going to get a chance to interview for their assistant coach jobs in the future. And now that Mike Sullivan is here, I guess they have to impress Sullivan. That's basically the long and short of it if they want to stay on with the Rangers. I'm fine with them interviewing as long as they're not being forced on Sullivan. I'm a big fan of the new head coach, getting to do things his way and not having any assistant coaches forced upon him. But look, I mean, if Pekka and Muse, if they get along with Sullivan, if they impress in the interview and Sullivan wants to keep them around, by all means, it just kind of depends on what Sullivan wants. I mean, that's what it should come down to. Then you've also got a couple of mainstays on Sullivan's coaching staff. You've got Mike Vellucci and Ty Hennis. Vellucci played in the NHL 2 games to be exact with the Hartford Whalers, RIP Whalers. But he's been an assistant coach with Pittsburgh since the start of 2020, 2021. So he spent the last half decade with Sullivan. Would not be shocked to see him join the Ranger coaching staff because, again, obviously there's some familiarity there. We'll talk about him in greater detail for sure, if he ends up joining the Ranger staff. And then you've also got Ty Hennis. Hennis was the skating and skills coach with the Penguins beginning in the 2018-2019 season, became an assistant coach in 2022-2023. So he's been with Sullivan for 3 years. And again, same deal. There's familiarity there. So I would not be surprised if he ends up joining Sullivan's staff. But again, we'll talk about that in greater detail if that indeed happens. We'll call it there for today. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, and I will see you next time.